Namaskar, Nilesh Oak here with another episode. Some time ago, I talked about what is a theory, why theory is one of the essential element. If we have to research something in a scientific and logical fashion, and after making that discovery or after solving that problem, after making that revolutionary output, whatever is the outcome, when you are presenting it to others, we use a framework, and that's basically the logic of scientific method, or what Nyaya Darshan calls the Panchavaya Avayava, the 5-step method. Identical, both of them are identical. So we talked about the theory aspect, one of the 5 elements from that. Now this episode is about an extension to it. Now some of you would immediately think, okay, I think I saw that and I understood everything and I don't see why I need to watch this. If you think like that, I understand why you would think like that, but you are going to be dead wrong. In fact, what we are going to discuss in this episode distinguishes a scientific and logical research from fakery, fake research, agenda-driven research. Okay, you can give as many names as you like. What else we can call? Siddhanta is not even a right word to be used with the fakery. But for a lack of better word, we might even call it Chadma Siddhanta. Okay, extremely fake, agenda-driven theories and claims are made where people want to prove whatever they have a priori in their mind. Okay, and how do we separate this? To understand this, we must understand what is a theory, we must understand what is a hypothesis, we must understand the emphasis on empirical testing, objective testing, testability, refutability, falsifiability. They're all connected with corroboration, corroborability. These are all connected with the testability, pratyaksha. Now, of course, people confuse with the pratyaksha too, but we will get to that point at some point in this series. But today we are going to talk about the extension of that theory. But just because you hear the word extension, and if you think it's trivial, you are dead wrong, as I said. In fact, this is the crucial portion of the one of the 5 elements of this theory formation. Okay, it's the foundation on which science or adhyatma or logic is built. So let's jump into the presentation itself. All right. There are 2 types of extended hypothesis or hypothesis that we are going to discuss. And it's very critical that we understand the distinction between the 2. These are extremely elusive, especially to a novice, especially to someone who has no to poor understanding of scientific method, has poor scientific acumen, and also struggles with logical reasoning skills. Some of you might have noticed I keep on repeating this scientific acumen and logical reasoning skills. The quick comparison that I can think of is what Bhagavan Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita. He says, Manushyanam sahasreshu, among the 1,000, one may be found. Of course, he is giving this in a different context, but frankly, that context is equally applicable here. And saying that among the 1,000 only one qualifies is actually a euphemism. In reality, maybe it's 1 in 100,000 or maybe 1 in million. Sufficient research has not been conducted on this very subject. But based on the limited data I have, that I have encountered many researchers, decorated or otherwise, in all different spheres of life, and by that I mean in corporates, in academia, non-academia, Indology studies. It's a very pathetic situation, but my point is maybe it's a realistic situation. We feel, or at least I feel, it is pathetic, and that has to do with many aspects. One is the person's integrity, but how do we know, other than somebody just telling us, hey, I follow great integrity standards? Everyone, even a thief, even a fraud will say that. And how do we distinguish? Some of the tools that I'm discussing allow you to do that. Now, if you think it's a ready-made something on the platter and you're going to use this as a litmus test, or a traffic signal at the junction, intersection, like red, yellow, green, well, not really. You have to practice this. You need tapasya. The previous episode on the theory, a hypothesis and a theory, what the difference is. So keep that in mind. If any one of you have not watched that episode, then you have every reason to watch that episode. Okay, here I have used two words, sahaya hetu for auxiliary hypothesis and chadma hetu for ad hoc hypothesis. Did I show you? Yeah, okay. So this is our doubt clearing machine, DCM, the 5 elements of the logic of scientific method, or Panchavaya Avayava, 5 elements, 5 limbs of the Pararthanuman described by Nyaya Darshan. And these are essential. Without this, there is no scientific or logical discussion of anything, period. It's worth repeating, anyone claiming anything, at a minimum, even if you don't understand what that individual is saying, ask the question, what are your answers to these 5 questions? So part of this is that prameya, which is a hypothesis or a theory, prameya and a siddhanta, or think of that as the equivalent of hypothesis and a theory, and so on. We are going to look at exactly that, but we'll see why this extension that we are going to talk about is required. Okay, do watch this first episode on hypothesis and a theory. If you have not watched it already, you can go here to this my educational channel on the YouTube. Okay, at Nilesh Oak. You can subscribe, or I don't know how all that stuff works, but definitely watch that episode, going through the videos or search through keywords like hypothesis and theory and so on. All right. The other word, so just like I said, sahaya hetu or chadma hetu, similarly, we can use the word sahaya tarka, chadma tarka, and they're directionally same. So for example, it may become chadma tarkikam, for example, would be a translation of, say, ad hoc hypothesis into Sanskrit. And same thing for the sahaya tarkikam and so on. You get an idea. Sahayak in the sense of, everyone knows the word sahayak, okay? A assisting hypothesis, okay? Elucidatory hypothesis, auxiliary, like additional hypothesis that is needed to make things clear. Okay, and ad hoc hypothesis, we are going to look at the definition in a second here. So let's jump into the definition of auxiliary hypothesis. Okay, we may read this a couple of times. Okay, if you need to pause the video, read it, write it down, take a photograph, whatever that works for you, to internalize this definition. All theories contain assumptions about the nature of constructs and how they can be measured. So in the theory statement itself, all the details are not given. Okay, that's what this statement is saying. That is something people who are working in science ought to know. But as I said, Manushyanam Sahasreshu, majority simply don't know. And if you doubt what I am saying, go test few individuals and ask them tough questions about science and logic and see it for yourself. If you consider yourself a person of science, ask those questions to yourself. Okay, look at some of the competing claims for any specific subject, and I'll just repeat. Say, for example, the dating of Mahabharata or dating of Ramayana, dating of Sushruta, and so on, and see what the differences are and why, what caused those differences, and you'll start understanding. Let's continue with the definition. However, not all predictions are derived from theories, and assumptions can sometimes be drawn from other premises. Which is to say, again, all the details are not given in the theory itself, that's number one. But there are occasions, and this happens for hundreds of different reasons, so I'm not going to name them. It will be better to actually take the specific examples, few illustrations, and through that explain what this definition is trying to say. So not all predictions are derived from the theories, and assumptions can sometimes be drawn from other premises. This may be required to make sense of the evidence that is presented or the evidence that we have extracted based on the theory that we are employing. Additional assumptions that are made to deduce a prediction and tested by making links to that observable data after we test it, that is called auxiliary hypothesis. Again, as we go through the actual examples, pause. I don't know if we are going to have time in this episode, we'll see. Either in this episode or in future episodes, the insight, okay, the wisdom of this auxiliary hypothesis definition will become clear to you. However, it would be useful if you, after this episode, you go to, say, Google and just type the name auxiliary hypothesis and read everything you can find. In fact, what I did is I just, for finding some definitions, I mean, to me, I understand exactly what auxiliary hypothesis is, and so is ad hoc hypothesis. But if you ask me for a definition of it, I may actually struggle. So what I did, I went to internet, just typed auxiliary hypothesis, and looked at few definitions and pulled the one that I felt is okay. All right. So this is the definition. This is a desirable type of hypothesis, by the way, as opposed to ad hoc hypothesis, which must be avoided at any cost. And you can be assured, okay, the frauds and the fakers would definitely embrace ad hoc hypothesis. So what could be an example or a couple of examples of this auxiliary hypothesis? Well, let's look at a couple of them. Again, I always worry, so for example, if people don't know the specific things that are used as upaman or as a metaphor, as a simile, okay, and just as an example, udaharan, if they don't know, then they may confuse, then they have to go and find their own definitions or own examples, okay. So what could be an example of an auxiliary hypothesis? If a chlorine lime washing solution is antiseptic, so chlorine lime is a washing solution, okay, that is going to say clean the things, okay, it may remove the stains and so on. But let's say there is an additional property that is associated with it, or the additional property that we are interested in it, or somebody asks us, hey, by the way, you are using this to wash things, can you check if these things also act as antiseptic? Okay, maybe another time we'll talk about the design of experiments, and how very extremely powerful designs developed around the world, okay, right from Japan to America, and how they are so powerful that they allow you to do only limited number of experiments and still study multiple parameters. So imagine something like this. This is the antiseptic aspect of this washing solution is something we want to study. Okay, then what could be the test? So of course the things would be washed, maybe the clothes or whatever it is, and then, or in this case hands, okay, the chlorine lime washing solution to say wash hands. Then it says if it is antiseptic, then hands would be sterile. So this statement is like a theory. If a chlorine lime washing solution is antiseptic, then hands would be sterile. Okay, now we have to actually test it and see if there are still germs remaining, and we have to define some criteria and so on. Okay, now what does that mean? If it was an antiseptic, so actually we will still go and do the test, right? Either way, we want to know whether it is antiseptic or not. Then if it was an antiseptic, then washing would have produced a false test. Okay, so the importance of auxiliary hypothesis becomes clearer when we consider the conditions under which the testing hypothesis occurs. So we have to understand what is the main hypothesis and what is a additional, supportive, clarifying, elucidatory secondary hypothesis, but a desired one, and that is called auxiliary hypothesis. Of course, once we start getting into the examples, it will become clear to you. Very likely, it won't be in this episode. In fact, we might have to do series of episodes, and we won't do this just on the auxiliary hypothesis. There may be some other additional purpose why we are doing it, but it's important that you internalize the theory, you internalize hypothesis versus theory, you internalize auxiliary hypothesis, you internalize auxiliary versus ad hoc hypothesis. If you want to chart this course of action in understanding and finding who is using the truly true sense logic of scientific method and who is faking it, okay, who is just throwing some dirt at you, okay, dazzle you, and basically carry out their fraud. Okay, if you want to truly accomplish that, then you need to internalize these things and practice. All right, so this is one example. The second example, again, both examples are tough ones if you are not familiar with it. If you are familiar with it, both examples are amazing and simple examples. The second example is what I have taken. It is a good example of auxiliary hypothesis, and this is one of the many auxiliary hypotheses that I employed in dating the Mahabharata war. For example, let me read the example first. If Vakra, now if you don't understand this, then you have to go read my books, guys. You have to watch my other talks. You have to look at, say, for this understanding this second example, you have to understand how I tested 50 plus different descriptions of planetary evidence from the text and the pages of the Mahabharata text related to the 18 days Mahabharata war. Okay, otherwise this can be Greek to you. Now if Vakra means oblique crossing in Mahabharata, which is the auxiliary hypothesis I put forward, then the claimed year of the Mahabharata war, in my case or in anyone's rational case, ought to be 5561 BC, although that is not the case, and that gives that arthantar. Okay, tat trairasham raga dvesha moha arthantara bhavat. Okay, and many other reasons, but Nyayadarshana says it boils down to these three. And even among these three, it says when the person deviates from attaining the truth or the best approximation to the truth with available science and technology, and the reason is the person's emotion, attachment to some dogmatic truth that they have heard, dogmatic assertion, dogmatic claim that they have heard, enviousness, okay, the fear of missing out, like, hey, how come I did not figure this out, or pure stupidity, which is to say lack of intellect to understand these things. These are the only three things. And Nyayadarshana goes on to say that actually there are no three, there is only one, that is stupidity or lack of intellect. Because that drives people to become emotional even in the matters of knowing the truth. Or that drives people in becoming envious. And you can see these among my troll list. You can see them, not just my troll list. You can see people saying all kinds of things to our Prime Minister Modi ji and many other individuals, many great individuals. Okay, back to number 2. If Vakra means oblique crossing in Mahabharata, the claimed year of Mahabharata war would show Vakra descriptions matching with that year, namely the 5561 BCE. And since Vakra is not the same as its typical meaning retrograde, which is retrograde, this meaning, additional evidence would fulfill retrograde motions of planets. Let me just explain this. Typically, in an Indian context, in Indian astronomy, not to confuse with astrology, but if you confuse, tough luck, that's your problem. In astronomy, Indian astronomy, typically Vakra is used in the sense of retrograde, and that is actually correct. So, if somebody starts looking at the astronomy evidence from the Mahabharata text, that individual is going to encounter 3 instances of Vakra motions of planets. In fact, Mars does it twice, and Jupiter does it once. Now, if somebody insists that Vakra means retrograde, even referring to these descriptions from Mahabharata, as most folks, except yours truly, claim that they take Vakra to mean retrograde. Fine. Now, what's the problem? Let's quickly look at those 3 references. Mars is described going Vakra in 2 places. First is Magha Swangarako Vakra Shravanecha Brahaspati. So these are the 2 different Vakri motions. Okay, one is Angarak, means Mars going Vakra near Nakshatra Magha, and Brahaspati, which means Jupiter, going Vakra near Nakshatra Shravan. So if somebody insists that, look, this is very obvious, Vakra means retrograde, like 99% of all existing Mahabharata dating researchers. Most of them even don't bother to do this because they cannot show this to be true. But some cocky Mahabharata dating researchers, not knowing what they are getting into, they just say, yeah, come on, Vakra means retrograde. Now, what is the problem? They cannot show, for whatever date they are claiming, Jupiter going retrograde near Nakshatra Shravan and Mars going retrograde near Nakshatra Magha. This is the problem. There is one more. For Mars, it goes like Krutva Changarako Vakra Jeshtaya Madhusudana Anuradha Prarthayate Maitram Samshayamanniva. So what is it saying? Angarak, Krutva, Changarako, Vakra. Angarak is going Vakra, Mars is going Vakra again near Jeshta Anuradha. Now if you look at the timing of Mahabharata, it was a short duration war, 18 days. It's not going on for years and years. Okay. So all the evidence that is presented in the context is what? Of that time, of those 18 days, and depending on the nature of evidence, say plus minus 1 year, maybe plus minus 2 years, not more than that. Okay. Now, if you understand how frequently Mars goes retrograde and how it keeps on changing its position with respect to which nakshatra it will go retrograde, then immediately you will understand that this Vakra, Mars going Vakra near Nakshatra Magha, and then immediately going Vakra as in retrograde near Nakshatra Jeshta Anuradha is simply not possible. In addition, that such kind of evidence would have no relevance for the dating of any specific event, which is a short duration event like 18 days. Okay. I'll not go into the technicalities of that. If you understand, great. If you don't understand, take it on Shraddha for now and commit yourself to studying and understanding by reading my books and watching my additional videos and so on. And even actually taking some lessons in astronomy. Okay. And if you like Sanskrit, okay, not to put Sanskrit away. Okay. So when this happened, because I had a decent knowledge of astronomy, still very limited, but enough to make this clear decision, that I realized that Vakra, Mahabharata author would not have used Vakra in the sense of retrograde. Otherwise, the references given are simply not possible. And actually, we have a proof of that, because no other Mahabharata researchers, okay, no other Mahabharata researcher, exceptions none, has successfully showed Jupiter going retrograde near Shravan and Mars going retrograde near Magha and again near Jeshta Anuradha for the year he or she has claimed. And that itself directly falsifies their claim, because they insist that Vakra means retrograde but fail to show it. Okay? So at that time, of course, initially I also took Vakra as a retrograde. Why not? Because that's what generally it means. But when I realized what the problem is, I said, what else it could mean? Because Mars going retrograde separated by 7 nakshatras in a period of 1, 2, maximum 3 years is simply impossible, especially knowing those nakshatra sequence, like Magha versus Jeshta Anuradha. So I said, so I started observing, and by the way, I had actually a claim, multiple claims, but that included 5561 BCE, initially proposed by Dr. P.V. Vartak, Padmakar Vishnu Vartak. So it was there. So I said, okay, and all the signs were showing that this appears to be a correct claim. Okay, not based on the planetary evidence. So I want to say, okay, does it fit? I did the same thing for the Lele Shastri's claim of 5228 BCE and many other claims. I have tested every single claim for the year of Mahabharata war where the person who claimed it has bothered to at least show some evidence in its support. Because let me tell you, out of 130 plus claims, there are easily close to 100 folks who are so careless, so casual and idiotic that they have simply copied somebody's number and not done a thing of their own. And we will slowly go one after the other, okay, and using these tools. But it will take some time. So I said, what else it could be? And then I spent many years in the sense, many years in simulation, looking at all the possible motions of Jupiter and all the possible motions of Mars. See, this is called Tantra Yukti, or this is called Tapasya. Tapo balam hi kevalam, tapo balam hi sadhanam. Without research, without lot of hard work, none of these things are possible. Again, this is a message to those who frequently contact me, or many of such folks contact me, maybe not frequently, ask me, they want to do research like me, but they are not capable. They don't even have a willingness to put the efforts. It is for them. Okay. So what I did is I said, maybe Vakra does not mean retrograde, but it means oblique crossing of a planet across the ecliptic, across the path of the sun. Just like when moon does it, when it crosses the path of the sun, the ecliptic, and exactly the point where it crosses, we call that a node, and we call that either the Rahu or a Ketu, depending on whether it is an ascending node or a descending node. So I said, well, planets also do the same thing besides moon. So could that be the case, like oblique crossing across the ecliptic? And so now me saying this, that Vakra means oblique crossing across the ecliptic in Mahabharata, is my auxiliary hypothesis. Keep that in mind. Okay. Now this created two problems. First thing, I have to take these three descriptions, Jupiter going obliquely crossing near Shravana now with this new modified definition of Vakra. That's why it's a different hypothesis. Okay. Auxiliary hypothesis. This is the additional clarification that is required, because retrograde is not going to work. And I don't mean just not going to work for me, it's not going to work for anyone. Even before we test it, we know it. Isn't that amazing? And we can actually know about any theory a lot before even we start testing. That's the power of this logic of scientific method. So I said, okay, so I have three instances where I can test this, my auxiliary hypothesis that Vakra means oblique crossing. Does it come out correct? Jupiter going obliquely across the ecliptic near Shravan, and Mars going obliquely across the ecliptic near Magha, and again Mars going doing oblique crossing across the ecliptic near Jeshta Anuradha. And when I did that, they all three came with the flying colors. Hold on. If you think we are done, we are not done. Now, can you tell me what the problem is? Because this is not an interactive session, do think of your answer in your mind before I give you the answer. My question is, if Vakra, instead of taking it as a retrograde, if I have taken this as an oblique crossing, and therefore now this is an auxiliary hypothesis, a supportive additional hypothesis, extraneous hypothesis that I have made in testing my original theory. What is my original theory? Astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata text are astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata times. So yes, these are astronomy descriptions, but in order to test these three specific descriptions, I have to redefine Vakra, and that redefining is that auxiliary hypothesis. Now see if this helps you understand the definition of auxiliary hypothesis. I'm going to read that and I'll come back to Vakra again. For example, the definition says there at the top, all theories contain assumptions about the nature of constructs and how they can be measured. So yes, we are going to look at this data empirically, the nature of construct, the assumption, and how that's going to be measured. But just the nature of it just told us that the Vakra equal to retrograde is simply not possible. Now, to understand this, you must have a reasonable understanding of astronomy. Most of the people who claim to use astronomy evidence from the Mahabharata text and then claim that they have come up with a year of Mahabharata war using astronomy evidence, I assert, which means it is backed by evidence, what I'm going to say next, that most of these folks, Mahabharata dating researchers, claiming to have used astronomy evidence to arrive at the date of Mahabharata war, do not understand astronomy enough in a scientific and logical fashion, even the basics of astronomy, to do a good job. They have done an extremely lousy job, guys, and we are going to analyze it as and when time permits. But back to this Vakra. So actually, this change of this definition from Vakra to mean retrograde, which is in typical Indian astronomy practice in our times, changing that, at least in the context of a Mahabharata, okay? We don't know if that, at least I did not know at that time, if it would stand true for other texts related to Mahabharata or even other Itihasa texts like Ramayana, and that's beyond the scope of our discussion today, just to manage the time. But at least for these three, it must be true, okay? That's the importance of auxiliary hypothesis, and we are going to make a distinction based on this between auxiliary hypothesis and ad hoc hypothesis. Why one is desired, in fact, it is to be celebrated if successfully tested and passes with flying colors, okay? It's like a revolution. On the other hand, why somebody trying to do ad hoc hypothesis, the person needs to be reprimanded for doing such nonsense, okay? They appear to be similar, guys, and that's why I'm spending time on this. Okay, so if Vakra means not retrograde and oblique crossing, and in case of Mahabharata, those all three references passed their test with flying colors, yes, Jupiter indeed crosses the ecliptic obliquely around Nakshatra Shravan in 5561 BC plus minus 1 year. Mars does cross obliquely the ecliptic and arrives at Nakshatra Magha, again at the time of Mahabharata war, 5561 BC plus minus 1 year. And that same Mars does it again within that same time period, 5561 BC plus minus 1 year, near Jeshta Anuradha, okay? Crosses the ecliptic there. So that passed the three tests. Wow. Congratulations, celebration. But are we done? We are not done, because now that should, or that actually did create the other problem. So since retrograde is one of the most magnificent observable visual phenomenon in the sky, and by making this auxiliary hypothesis of Vakra is equal to not retrograde but rather equal to oblique crossing of a planet across the ecliptic, now the question arises, so wait, what happened to retrograde motions? And therefore I have written there the next thing, that since Vakra is not the same as its typical meaning retrograde, additional evidence would fulfill, or rather must fulfill, the retrograde motions of planet. By additional evidence I mean we have to look for some other descriptions where the retrograde motions of the planets are described without the use of the word Vakra, because Vakra is now taken for oblique crossing. And do we find the evidence for it? Absolutely. Okay, we find wonderful evidence for the retrograde motion of Saturn and Jupiter and Mars and Venus, and guess what? Not just once, especially for the first three, the superior planets, which is Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, visible to the naked eye and outside the Earth in the solar system. For all three of them, we have actually multiple descriptions of their retrograde motion. Okay, I'm not going to go into that. That would be a separate episode. I have already covered this in my planetary evidence of the Mahabharata text. Those videos are on my channel. You may go watch them. But my point is, Vakra changing to oblique crossing not only successfully tested those three instances for Jupiter and Mars together, but it also tested 4+ instances of retrograde for these 4 planets. Okay, and we'll discuss that some other time. So that extent, now the auxiliary hypothesis, what did it do? It actually made everything testable, which otherwise we could not test, because showing Mars going retrograde at Magha and then immediately at its next instance, let's say at Jeshta Anuradha, is simply impossible. We are looking at a time frame of what? About like a 7 to 10 years to actually just reach there, and then it opens a can of worms. The question is, why did Bhagwan Vyasadeva, in trying to put together the timestamps, astronomy is time, so therefore astronomy timestamps, astronomy clues into the Mahabharata text to timestamp the date, why did he use something that are separated by 5, 10, 15 years? That does not make sense. It leads to more problems than it solves. Okay, so that's why this auxiliary hypothesis is important. This is not the only instance when I use auxiliary hypothesis. We will look at additional examples as and when time permits. Let's move on to ad hoc hypothesis. Now in this episode I have not given the examples, illustrations of this, but that's for a reason. As a homework, eventually when time permits, we will take ad hoc hypothesis as a subject and make a long series, taking all the other Mahabharata and Ramayana dating researchers and just show you how it's a ad hoc hypothesis extravaganza, one after another, and the utter nonsense that is being created. And therefore I said, well, let's not even go into the examples of it, but if time permits I may do some. So let's first look at the definition, the Vakhya of ad hoc hypothesis. Let's look at a couple of them. An ad hoc hypothesis is created specifically to explain a single piece of evidence or anomaly, often without broader theoretical support, and making it appear like a last-minute fix to save a theory from being disproven. Until I have a time to show you specific illustrations, please take this as a homework to watch my videos. Now they may not be on my channel, but I'll just give you a few names. For example, on Sangam Talk, I had a 3-part debate with Dr. Manish Pandit. He rooting for claiming 3067 BCE, the date originally proposed by Professor K.S. Raghavan, then blindly followed and deceptively tried to support by late Professor Narahari HR. And because I guess, I don't know the reason why Dr. Manish Pandit fell in love with this most unscientific illogical theory. But the point is, I think maybe because I think made one video sometime, I forgot exactly when, around 2009 or around that time, Krishna, Myth or Reality. And I wouldn't blame him, like, he made use of whatever was he came across, and he ended up using 3067 claim. But in that raga dvesha moha problem, even when he realizes that that's one of the most ridiculous claim, he is so attached to it, and we are all guilty of it, being attached to different things. He finds it very hard to give it up. Be it as it may, but he and I had a three-part debate, hosted by Sangam Talks, Rahul Diwanji, and those are there on the Sangam Talks. I would encourage you to watch them. Recently, HyperQuest also had a wonderful discussion with Vedvir Aryaji and myself. Vedvir Aryaji's claim of 3162 BC and mine, of course, 5561 BC, and that is also a good episode. There is another one that was done by Pragyata, and that was with Konrad Elst. Now, Konrad Elst doesn't have his own date, so ideally that's not even a debate per se. But for the practical purposes, he said, hey, he doesn't have an exact specific year in mind, but he is of the opinion that Mahabharata war happened around 1400 BCE. So that particular episode is also worth listening to, watching to. And one more thing I will mention, at the International Waves Conference, I think that was in Dallas, where it was not so much a debate, but it had a flavor of a debate to an extent. This was a panel discussion on the dating of ancient events or Mahabharata, I forgot. And that particular panel discussion had myself, I think Dr. Raj Vedam was facilitating it, if I remember correctly. Dr. Subhash Kak was also participating. Professor Narari Achar was around at that time. Now he unfortunately passed away a few years ago. I'm talking of 2018 International Waves Conference. So Professor Narari Achar was there, and Professor Shashi Tiwari, if I remember, and I don't remember who else was there. I might be missing it. Maybe Sahana Singh. I'm forgetting. That panel discussion at the Waves site on YouTube, WAVES, is also worth listening to. And in what context? Is to look for this definition. An ad hoc hypothesis is created specifically to explain a single piece of evidence or anomaly, often without broader theoretical support, making it appear like a last-minute fix to save a theory from being disproven. And the four instances that I told you, like 3 debates, with Manish Pandit, Vedvir Aryaji and Konrad Elst, and one panel discussion with Professor Narari Achar, Professor Dr. Subhash Kak, Professor Shashi Tiwari, and Dr. Raj Vedam facilitating it, of course. He doesn't have his own position or chooses not to take any specific position for reasons unknown to me. Anyways, so do watch those, keeping this ad hoc hypothesis definition in mind. That's my point. There is a second definition, again, has to be similar, but let's read it. An ad hoc hypothesis is a hypothesis that is added to a theory to save it from being disproved. It is a supplementary hypothesis, so is auxiliary, by the way. It is therefore, it's very critical to understand both, and then also understand why one turns out to be auxiliary, or why one is to be considered auxiliary whereas the other one has to be considered ad hoc. And I'm going to help you with some clues and some tips. It is a supplementary hypothesis, nothing wrong with that. So is auxiliary hypothesis, that it is used to account for anomalies that the theory could not have predicted. Now, to that extent, it is not a bad thing, because theory statement may be actually is expected to be generic and universal, so it may not have all the details. To that extent, proposing a supplementary hypothesis is not a problem. In fact, as I said, the auxiliary and ad hoc are supplementary hypotheses. But why auxiliary is desired, auxiliary is to be praised, auxiliary is to be celebrated, whereas ad hoc hypothesis is to be reprimanded? Why? Okay, so we are going to basically look at that. All right, okay. Okay, let me get back to the presentation. Okay, so that's the definition. I was getting a call, guys. Okay, so I had to just check, and it's an international call, so I need to call that individual up as soon as I finish this episode. Okay, let's quickly look at the Sanskrit words. Okay, take a minute and read the different definitions of auxiliary. So what I did is I typed the word auxiliary and asked for different Sanskrit words, and then I did the same thing for the word in a different fashion, because I used the Sanskrit word chadma or chadman and looked for its different English meanings. Take a minute. I'm going to leave it there on the screen and read them. In fact, while you read those, what I am going to do is respond to this individual. Okay, let me see where he wrote to me. These are the nature of things. That's called life. We have to do these things. Okay. All right. Okay, so auxiliary means sahaya. That's why I use the word sahaya or sahayak type of thing. Another, so sahaya, we know that word sahaya or sahaya. Okay, on the other hand, if I would have used like the word like a shrita, for example, I don't know who would have understood it. Certainly I did not. Okay, so atirikta is like a additional, and does not, it captures the additional aspect of it, supplementary aspect of it, but it does not capture the supportive, the sahayak. That's why I chose the word sahaya. On the chadma, I already selected the word. My good friend, a Sanskrit expert, the name will be withheld in a secret fashion for now, suggested to me the word chadma, and I loved it. I mean, I intuitively knew the meaning of it, but for the benefit of everyone, I just typed that word and pulled out all the different meanings of it. So let's quickly read for the chadman. It's a beautiful word, very appropriate, apt word for describing ad hoc hypothesis. Allegation, roof, pretext, pretense, fraud, external covering, disguise, deceptive, deceitful, deceit, while. These are all good words. Some of them are not relevant, like a roof or let's say external covering, and definitely not the dress. But all the other words are actually very relevant. Okay, maybe not allegation here either. Okay, it is we who are going to make an allegation to anyone who uses ad hoc hypothesis, but that's not the meaning here. Okay, so based on that, essentially I have used that word, and then remember, if you notice, I used the word tarka and also hetu. So quick Nile's notes on the different meanings of tarka, so you get an idea in case you don't know or did not know. Wish, well, not very relevant here. System or doctrine founded or speculated, maybe not, but close. Supplying an ellipsis, no. Philosophical system, yes. Okay, motive, yeah, right. Desire, conjecture is a good one there. Cause, inquiry. Reasoning is also useful, just like hetu. That's why I have used them in a interchangeable fashion. Okay, some cases, depending on the context, hetu is more appropriate, and again, depending on the context, tarka can be more appropriate. Confutation, logic, inquiry, speculation, and so on. And then quickly for the hetu, okay, this is what is used in the panchavaya avayavaha, like in what we call the theory or the statement of a theory, or the reasoning or the rational is what is used in panchavaya avayava as a hetu. Reason for an inference, then that's why that foundation. Reason for primary cause, not price, that's not relevant for what we are discussing. Motive, kind of directionally, yes. Not mode, not means, not manner, but yes, logical reason, logic, impulse. Yeah, very good. Our hypothesis is an impulse. We don't know if it is true, but impulsively we feel like that. Definitely not cause, definitely not condition, and cause, yes, we already covered that. So with this, let's get back to the hypothesis. Two types of hypothesis. We already looked at the definition. Now let's look at quickly the key points for each of these, and then a apple to apple comparison. All right, and then we are done. So auxiliary hypothesis, a desired kind of hypothesis. Both of them are supplementary, but we are saying one is good, desired, go for it, congratulations, and other one we are saying what nonsense, how stupid, why did you think of this, do you understand the stupidity you have done? Okay, this is how different they are, exactly opposite of each other. Okay, both are supplementary though. So therefore I thought of doing this as a separate standalone episode, otherwise the things get lost. Okay, what are the key points of auxiliary hypothesis? Key characteristics, salient features of this auxiliary hypothesis. One, it is testable. In another language we can say it must be testable, otherwise puff out, it becomes ad hoc. Okay, and we'll see that it is testable. Auxiliary hypothesis must lead to testability of the evidence for which it is proposed. Remember, I'll just pull that example of a Vakra. If we take Vakra as a retrograde, we cannot even test the observation of Mars going retrograde near Magha and again near Jeshta Anuradha in the context of 18-day Mahabharata war before even testing for a specific year. It is that obvious to anyone who understands the basics of astronomy and basics of Mars going retrograde and how frequently it goes, and to what sequence and in what chronological table it changes the nakshatra where it goes retrograde. Okay, so now when we change that from a retrograde to oblique crossing, did we turn it to testable? Did we turn it into empirical? Or now we say, hey, it cannot be tested, it is somebody else's problem. Then it becomes ad hoc. Here I tested it, and not only that, of course I could have failed, and that's different, but still the testability is important. So my auxiliary hypothesis, I should still get marks, but of course not for the date if I could not show this to corroborate with the year 5561 BC. Fortunately I could. But the problem is even bigger if you cannot make it testable, and as we are going to see with all other Mahabharata dating researchers, the kind of, I don't want to call it fun, I don't want to call it humor, okay? It is a crime. It is an intellectual crime or lack of intellectual crime that they have done, okay? So auxiliary hypothesis must lead to testability of the evidence for which it is proposed, which is what? The word Vakra in our case. And we didn't just stop there. Once we explained the three instances of Vakra to mean oblique crossing for Jupiter and two instances for Mars, then we didn't stop, because we know Vakra means retrograde. So now we have taken a different meaning. It is our responsibility, it is my responsibility to now explain. So if I am taking Vakra as not retrograde but oblique crossing, how am I going to explain retrograde? And I beautifully took multiple references, close to 8 references from the Mahabharata text, and showed how they beautifully match and describe the retrograde motion of Jupiter, retrograde motion of Saturn, retrograde motion of Mars, retrograde motion of Venus in those appropriate nakshatra places where they were taking place according to Mahabharata text, and those all matching for the year 5561 BCE. Okay, first is it is testable. Second, auxiliary hypothesis enables refutability and falsifiability. Long words, complicated sounding words, actually it's not that difficult, but they have a different flavor, and therefore I separated them. If you go to Google and search it, you will also find some great individuals separating them for right reasons, which is, although it has to do with the testability, because unless something is testable, it will not be refutable and it will not be falsifiable. But there are some additional aspects to it, which is to say, yeah, you make it testable and you get some credit, But now, after you tested, did you end up refuting your own claim, or did you end up falsifying your own claim, or the test of it failed to refute your claim or failed to falsify your claim? Okay, to just make that subtle distinction, I'm putting it as a second thing. The third one leads to a auxiliary hypothesis must lead to, or it does lead to, consistency and unification with the main theory. It does not contradict, it does not bring the original theory in trouble if it's auxiliary hypothesis, and it is consistent. It better be consistent. It doesn't, that otherwise it will create contradiction, and we are going to see examples of that. In fact, we have so many examples, guys. Either you will have just a lot of humor, or you may even get tired of that humor, because that's the kind of deep fraud, okay, that is being done by many individuals, okay, for a quick fame. I don't know what are their motivations, okay, but it's been done. Okay, so number 3 leads to consistency and unification with the main theory. Okay, auxiliary hypothesis does not contradict the main theory statement. In addition, its introduction would lead to increase in testability, consistency, and growth of knowledge. Again, this is a lot easier to explain with example. For example, just briefly I will mention, take that Vakra means not retrograde but oblique crossing in the context of Mahabharata. Okay, so did it increase testability? Yes, not only for those 3 observations where the word Vakra is being employed by Bhagwan Vyasadeva in the Mahabharata text, but it raised another question. If Vakra is not retrograde, how are the retrograde motions of these planets are described by Vyasadeva in the Mahabharata text in the context of Mahabharata war? And you know, how does he describe? He describes it as Thai, Prajvalita, Apasavya, Parikramya, Tishtita, Dishtita, and so on. And those all beautiful words came together and perfectly describe the retrograde motions of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Okay, so what did it do? After that testability, it led to growth of knowledge. So we understood how Vyasa 7,500 years ago described the retrograde motions, how Vyasa described this oblique crossing of a planet, which in our times, frankly, we don't give much attention to. Okay, but Vyasa did. In that sense, the astronomy, Indian astronomy 7,500 years ago was more refined, okay, than what it is today, as far as those aspects are considered, the oblique crossing of planets. And the consistency, what is the consistency? Once I changed the definition of Vakra to mean not retrograde but oblique crossing, that same definition, that oblique crossing across the ecliptic, is shown to be valid for one instance of Jupiter doing this near Shravan, one instance of Mars doing this near Magha Nakshatra, and the second instance of Mars doing this near Jeshta Anuradha. That's what I mean by consistency. Now, there is additional aspects to it. For example, this was only for Jupiter and Mars. Now, did it happen that in these 2 cases, Vyasa used Vakra only to mean oblique crossing, but when it comes to Saturn's retrograde or Venus retrograde, it went back and used the word Vakra? The answer is no, it did not. And that again shows consistency, because all the Vakri motions of 4 planets that I just described, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, are described without the use of the word Vakra. And we can beautifully corroborate that with 5561 BC. So it did not compromise testability. By it, I mean the auxiliary hypothesis that Vakra is not retrograde but rather oblique crossing. It did not compromise testability, it retained testability, it enabled testability, it ensured testability. It increased the consistency, at least retained it and increased it, and definitely led to the growth of knowledge. Okay, all right. Let's go to the key points about the ad hoc hypothesis, which is the opposite of the auxiliary hypothesis. Number 1, lack of independent evidence. Look at this as one litmus test When somebody proposes a supplementary hypothesis, watch carefully to see if he or she then goes on to show actually the empirical evidence, or somehow finds a way to run away from that discussion. Again, as I told you, those four debates or panel discussion related to dating of Mahabharata that I refer to, and I am them in all four of them, by the way. Just on that point, I will tell you, I don't know, I would love to see many. I don't know of any other instance, at least in the social media, namely say recorded media in the sense of YouTube or whatnot, any other instance of live recorded debate on the Mahabharata dating where I am not there. Okay, think for a minute. Okay, guys. Okay, back to the key points about the ad hoc hypothesis. Lack of independent evidence. So watch for this. An ad hoc explanation usually relies solely on the data it is trying to explain, but it cannot explain, and without any additional supporting evidence from other observations or theories. So some explanation is proposed, just like I propose Vakra means not retrograde but oblique crossing along the ecliptic. Such similar explanation will be proposed, or is proposed, or was proposed, and we are going to look at those examples in future episodes. And then nothing. Nada. The person does not even talk about how he or she went on to test that additional supplementary hypothesis. Why? Because it's not based on any evidence, but also even the specific evidence for which it was proposed, that comes out to be wrong. Basically, that's a great test of the falsification of that particular claim and a theory, and we're going to look at that in comparison. Number 2, reduces explanatory power. By adding specific adjustments, supplementary hypothesis to fit a single piece of data, it can weaken the overall explanatory power of a theory. The theory cannot be used to make additional predictions, and we will talk about that. This is an extremely critical point of immense importance. I cannot overstate the importance of this. The ability of a theory to make new predictions, not known by anyone, not seen, not observed, not noticed by anyone else. Extremely powerful. Okay? And then the third one for this ad hoc hypothesis, it can be used to protect a favored theory. That's why it is done in an ad hoc fashion. Okay? And just to fool people, basically. In a simple language, that's what it means, because most people simply don't understand much of it when it comes to science and logic. Okay, so to take this opportunity, so that try to create a very what's the right word I'm looking for, a pretentious equal field, so the people, actually that's true. If you go and look at see these 4 events that I just mentioned, debate and 1 panel discussion, although very clear arguments have been made during these debates and discussion and panel discussion, most of the people will say, oh, this is so thankful, what a wonderful discussion, I am my thanks to all the Mahanubhav, and that's it. Which means they have not shown any critical ability to distinguish between what one person said versus the other. This is that last bullet, can be used to protect a favor theory based on the ignorance and the naivety of the onlookers. Okay, so researcher may resort to ad hoc explanations to avoid abandoning a well-established theory in the face of conflicting evidence, and if the audience is not savvy enough, then it carries the moment, it carries the day. Again, I would encourage you to watch all these 4 instances that I mentioned. Out of that 1 instance, that is my debate with Dr. Manish Pandit, is actually 3 parts. So those 3 parts plus the additional 3 parts. So you have to really watch total of 6 parts. Okay, it is a feast. Okay, guys, it is an intellectual feast on debate. And I will tell you, none of them is actually a true debate, true vada in the sense of nyaya. Actually, far from it. Okay, there are a lot of problems with it, and even then we all should feel glad, and my thanks to those who did participate into them for showing the courage, okay, and willingness to at least set some initial things going in the right direction, but we have a long way to go in conducting a proper debate. Okay, all right, so this is for ad hoc hypothesis, the last one. Let's do a quick apple to apple comparison between the two. Auxiliary hypothesis is testable, ad hoc is not testable. Otherwise they look the same, guys. Okay, you will not able to tell otherwise which one is auxiliary, which one is ad hoc. In fact, this table is basically how you are going to decide which one is auxiliary and which one is ad hoc. Auxiliary hypothesis leads, it's refutable, it's falsifiable, which means it is testable. That is not the case with ad hoc hypothesis. Okay, neither refutable nor falsifiable. Auxiliary hypothesis increases the empirical content. Okay, the ad hoc hypothesis decreases the empirical content. Again, my video has already gone to like an hour, so I'm not going to elaborate on these points, at least in this video. But we are going to look at a lot of stuff, very exciting, interesting, humorous, sad, okay, truthful and fake stuff, okay, using these tools. So auxiliary hypothesis increases the empirical content, ad hoc hypothesis decreases the empirical content. Auxiliary hypothesis increases the consistency of a theory, and I gave a brief illustration with that Vakra. And ad hoc hypothesis decreases or violates the consistency of a theory. We did not look at many or any example for ad hoc, so we will leave it at that for now, but we will refer to this table when we look at illustrations, and there are so many, guys, so many for this ad hoc hypothesis nonsense. Number 5, a result auxiliary hypothesis is a result of significant empirical testing. Ad hoc hypothesis is actually a superficial attempt to save the theory and or favorite claim. Auxiliary hypothesis leads to growth of knowledge. We just briefly described that with the Vakra equal to not equal to retrograde, but rather oblique crossing, and I briefly described that. In case of ad hoc hypothesis, first thing, in a very euphemistic fashion, I'm using the word may not cohere. I'll tell you, based on my experience, every time anybody has used an ad hoc hypothesis, the thing becomes non-coherent. Okay, the theory, this starts conflicting with the theory. Actually, they destroy their credibility instantaneously. Anyone using an ad hoc hypothesis and then sticking to it, even when pointed out by somebody that this is stupid, this is idiotic, this is nonsense, this is unscientific, this is illogical, this is a fallacy, give it away, throw it up, and still the person does not listen. This is a good way of losing credibility by proposing and then sticking to ad hoc hypothesis. We'll talk of those examples and why that happens. So I just politely use the word may not cohere. In reality, all that I have seen, every time it turns the theory into a non-coherent theory. May point to deeper problems with the theory. Absolutely. That's why the person has no other way but to embrace ad hoc hypothesis, even at the cost of ruining one's reputation. Okay, creating fakery, going away from the satya, going away from the truth for a temporary, gain. Okay, so all the motivations could be many, but that's exactly what happens. It points to the person's willingness, but person's attachment to stick to the nonsensical ad hoc hypothesis is actually a litmus test that there are deeper problems with the theory. And also a proposal or use of it highlights a substantive revision for a theory and or a claim, meaning there is a need for a substantive revision for a theory or a claim. Again, we will address all these points when we do that. Quickly, those of you who want to prepare as we get more deeper into this subject, this method, I always use the Mahabharata Ramayana, and I'll continue to use that because it does, it allows me 2 birds in 1 stone. First thing, to understand how we arrived at these particular dates, 5561 BC for Mahabharata, 12,209 BC for Ramayana, why other dates are wrong, okay? But this same methodology is actually applicable for everything. Designing new products, designing new methods in agriculture, in medicine, in engineering, in defense, in philosophy, just name it, guys. Okay, this particular method is the method. Sometimes people say, oh, what method did you use? And my answer, my sort of a retort to that is, what do you mean? There is only one method, panchavaya avayava. Okay guys, if you come across, in the case of the logic of scientific method, I'm saying, if you come across any other, do point it out. Okay, there is none, at least that is my assertion, and I'm willing to be wrong, so bring it on. So these are the three books. If you are in India, this is the place to go. Subbu Publications. Get that package, read them multiple times, do the Parayana to get internalize all the stuff, and then you are going to love what these particular videos I am doing, but how we actually look at from a philosophical point of view, from a scientific point of view, from a devotional point of view, from a logical point of view, and how we use these methods, these insights for the betterment of today and future. Okay, which is that yato abhyudaya nishreyasa siddhi sadharma. Okay, and dharma ultimately it means kartavya. It's a duty, action that we have to do, and to direct the action in a correct fashion, we must have a proper knowledge, and for that these episodes are meant. If you are outside India, of course you can get it from Subbu too, but the best way may be, most cases, going to Amazon and looking at this. The books, the historic Rama is exactly same as 12,209. In both other cases, the names are the same, the cover looks different. This is just common sense, guys. Common sense. Get it. If you have it, great. If you don't have it, get it fast. This is a book in Marathi, Bharatiya Prachin Khagol Vigyan. Okay, it's in Marathi. It's been translated in many languages. Don't ask me when these other languages would be available. When they are available, I'll be posting it in my future videos. Okay, but if you don't know Marathi, but if you're excited about this book, grab this book. This could be your Marathi 101 learning. Okay, and there is a QR code there, and the publisher's name, phone number, etc., etc. All right. Ditto with the other books. Two of the books have been translated in Marathi out of my initial three. The third one is being translated at a breakneck speed, and that will come out soon. Don't ask me when it comes out, you will know. Keep following these talks, and you have a chance to get this Aitihasik Ram, translation of the historic Ram, aka also known as 12,209, in Marathi from the publisher directly, Param Mitra Publications. You can, or I don't know what the arrangement is, but you can scan the code, and for 400 rupees right now, I don't know how long this offer would be there, but you can get your book delivered to your home address, as long as it is in India. I said it. That's it, guys. Okay, so write your comments. Let me know what you thought of this episode. Is it helping you build your scientific acumen? Is it helping you build your logical reasoning skills? Because that's the intention, and that is the only intention. Okay, there is no other intention why I'm doing these videos. Frankly, it is exhausting, it is tiring, but as Swatantraveer Savarkar said, this is the particular path that I have chosen. I'll not say the whole thing, but I'll start the first line, and you can go and search it. Ki ghetale vratan he ami andhatene. This is not a task that I have decided, a path that I have decided to follow blindly. It was taken with a lot of thought, and so my goal is to continue on it, okay, until this life is over, and ready for the mystery and a magic after this. No samparaya pratibhati balam. Knowing what happens after death is not very easy to know. Okay, it's not a subject for childish or naive discussion. So anyways, so that's what I'm doing. This is the only objective behind it, to enlighten individuals, enlighten humanity, and so we can go from Anruta to Satya. Okay, write your comments, let me know what you think of this, and I will see you soon in another episode on another subject or related subject. Namaskar.